fantastic session of Conservation on Tap. This one is looking at women in conservation on tap. We didn't think we could call it Women on Tap because that's a little bit dubious. So we're going for more diplomatic, Women in Conservation on Tap. My name's Emily Bennett. I work at the Okavango Research Institute, and this series of panel discussions is aimed to provide information about conservation that's happening around Botswana and various cross-cutting themes, of which women, which is really about gender, constitutes an important cross-cutting theme. So we've got Vivian Diphuphu, who is the chairperson of Women for Conservation. We've got Peggie Ramaphane, who works for Women Against Rape. And then we've got Annette LaRocco, who is a Fulbright Scholar, who's looking at the role of all women conservation teams.
First of all, let me thank you, Emily, for the invitation. Coming all the way up here to come and share with you about the women in conservation. Like she said, my name is Vivian Diphuphu, and am the coordinator of Women for Conservation Botswana, that is WFCB. And then I also work permanently for Chobe Game Lodge. I work as an environmentalist. So WFCB, as we call it, it's a newly formed group that was formed by a few enthusiastic and very passionate women across Botswana. It was formed in 2020, and I had the privilege and the honor of joining the group. Also, I became the coordinator. So in 2021, April, we had the first workshop at African Drifters. That is when we met with 12 other passionate women in conservation, mostly to share what the group is going to be all about, the overview, what are the initiatives or the projects that are going to happen while being in this group. So we have a lot of initiatives that we all have, individual projects that each and every one of the pioneers or the champions have identified. Although because of COVID, most of them had a little setback, but we're hoping this time we will come back strongly and we'll focus on what to do going forward. So the Women for Conservation Botswana, it's mostly to inspire and encourage the indigenous women across Botswana to a more sustainable future of the local communities and the wildlife to coexist. And the aim mostly is to provide opportunities for these women in conservation. It can be through leadership, it can be through network, and it can be through education. So far, we've been working with a lot of companies in terms of mentorship, in terms of empowerment. We also have been advertising on our Facebook page, you know, in case we have any other maybe stakeholders in conservation, if they need anybody to do the internship or if they have any sort of work, then we advertise and then people apply. Then we do some interviews, and then that's how we get the women in conservation to get to do some work or get involved in conservation. So, like I said, I also work for Chobe Game Lodge. I'm part of the Chobe Angels, so that's an all-women guiding team. So far, it's been the biggest in Africa because we have 20 women guides. And through our Facebook page also, if we have vacant posts, we do put out some posts out there so that the young women out there that are interested in conservation can also have an opportunity.
My name is Peggie Ramaphane. Today I'm wearing my gender activist hat. So I won't say anything about women against rape. Sorry, Helen. I have been asked to join this esteemed panel to talk about the role of women in conservation. We can start off by saying what is conservation? Why are we so worried about conservation? And wherever you check, you will find that conservation is about protecting our environment. Both the animals, the flowers, the rivers, everything you can think of. And most of the time, when we are talking about conservation, we forget about people. That people are part of the conservation dialogue. And part of those people, half of them are women. Women are the ones responsible. Everyone who is a woman, touch your heart as I speak. We are the ones who are responsible for the livelihoods in the homes. If there is a meal to be prepared, it's the women. If there is a child to be nursed, to be breastfed, it's the woman. If there is someone ill to be cared for, it's the woman. And this is what is also happening in conservation. If we have to conserve firewood, it's the woman. If we have to conserve fish, it's the woman. If we have to conserve the kudu, it's the woman. So what are we doing for these women? Our women in the Okavango are gatherers. And we are also plowing. The women in the Okavango are the ones who work the fields, who produce the millet that we are drinking here. They are the ones who go for the fish to be eaten at home. And while they've gone to the fields to tend for the crops, the children are left alone where they go to school. They'll be in a small hut and they have to look after themselves while the women are out there creating or carving a livelihood for the family. So my challenge today is that the researchers, how are we making this comfortable for the women? This conservation, how are we making it comfortable for the women in the areas where we desperately need to make sure conservation is active? My suggestion, or what I'm positing over to you, is that women walk long distances to go and fetch firewood, to come and cook for the family. What are the alternative energies that they could be using, that us women could be using, which will free the time that I have to walk 5 kilometers or 15 kilometers to fetch wood, come back, cook, the wood is finished, I have to walk again tomorrow to come and do the same meal. And in the process, I might be killing some creepy crawlies along the way to where I'm going to get my wood. Or I might be chopping down trees so that tomorrow they are dry and I can take them home. How are we empowering this woman so that they can use alternative forms of energy? Like generating cooking gas from cow dung, or probably from elephant dung, which is relevant in our case. Is there research to empower the woman to be contributing in that way, so that she can have time to improve herself and maybe even attend guiding classes so that they can become a tour guide and earn better money? The women are also moving around, gathering fruits from the trees. Murula, mungongo, to go and make oil, muretwa. But are we teaching them to grow these plants? Do we have a nursery up in the Okavango that grows natural, indigenous plants of Botswana that we can then, as women contributing to conservation, replant or sell to the rest of the country where they don't have what we have this side? In that way, we are improving the livelihoods of the women by them participating positively in conservation. Fishing. We know that in Botswana, you don't fish all year round. And we travel in the Okavango. Do we have fisheries? Not fishing from the river. Growing fish, taking that fish, sending it to the market. We don't. Why? And this is where the women should be engaged in fisheries, making, growing, and selling fish all year round with added value, not just fish from the fish tank and it goes. No. We should be adding value to it and packaging. Those are the areas that I am here to say, researchers, business people out there, we need to support women to take part in conservation in very meaningful ways that will make them move out of the poverty level to the economic status that we all want. And as Botswana, we are classified as middle income country, but we are leaving a lot of people in the margins, especially where tourism is promoted. We are leaving women and children in the margins. The men, at least they can be tour guides, they can be what, and earn more money. So we want to bring up the women as well when we do conservation. So at the end, I would like to say, women are half the nation. Let them be visible half the time in all areas of the economy. Thank you very much.
I just want to start off, thank you for organizing this and for having me. I'm really excited to talk about my work. So a little bit about me. I'm an assistant professor of political science and a faculty affiliate at the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Florida Atlantic University, which is just north of Miami, for those of you who have never heard of this small university of mine. I'm currently a U.S. visiting Fulbright Scholar based at Ori, and my work looks at the socio-political impacts of conservation. And my previous work was more focused on the role of conservation and state building, but my new project is looking at the role of gender and wildlife conservation and tourism. So I'm still very early in my project. I only arrived at Ori on the 12th of September, so I'm really early in the project. But what I'm going to do tonight is sort of talk about the academic literature that frames my project and that I think can help inform my research, but also how we can make that actionable for both the industry as well as in the NGO space. I do want to note the Fulbright, explain a little bit what the program is. I'll just pull this from the website. It's led by the United States government in partnership with more than 160 countries worldwide. The Fulbright program offers international education and cultural exchange programs for passionate and accomplished students, scholars, artists, teachers, and professionals of all backgrounds to study, teach, and pursue important research and professional projects. So the Fulbright's been around since 1946, and it's sent over 400,000 people in exchanges, both Americans abroad and then people from abroad studying at American universities. So if you're interested in the Fulbright, especially if you're a student or a young professional, reach out to me. I can put you in touch with the person at the public affairs section at the embassy who is encyclopedic knowledge she has of the Fulbright program. She's been working on it for 20 years and is a great person to get in contact with. So for the last several years, there's been a bit of a novel approach that's been taken in some aspects of conservation and tourism, suggesting, well, what if women led the way? And so this has often been through all-female teams, such as Chile Angels, who we have an example of right here, and also wildlife ranger teams, as well as trying to bring women into already existing teams. So there are programs like this in at least 5 countries in Africa: Botswana, Zimbabwe, which I'll be doing another 3-month research trip in as part of this Fulbright. South Africa, Kenya, and Tanzania. If there are others that you know of, please let me know. I'm writing other grants about this project, so I'd be happy to know if I've missed any. And there's also been a lot of international attention to these kinds of programs, but very little academic research that looks at them from a kind of scholarly perspective to try to see what they're doing and why they operate the way that they do. So what I'm going to do is talk about 2 kinds of literatures that inspired this project that sort of inform the research that I'm doing moving forward. So the first is this literature around gender and the environment, which is often kind of referred to as ecofeminism. What is the role of women and gender norms within ecofeminist thought? And so there's sort of 2 big strains here. There's an older strain that we talk about as affinity ecofeminism, which talks about Gaia and Earth Mother, and in the Latin American context, the Pachamama, that argues that women are just inherently and naturally more suited to caring for the environment because of their role as mothers and the ethics of care, and analogies of women caring for the environment as they care for their domestic settings. There's another, and so this is probably best encapsulated by Susan Griffin's book, Woman and Nature. But there's another strain of ecofeminism that says, actually it's social ecofeminism. What we're talking about is men and women accessing environment differently, but they access environment differently not because of something that's natural, but because of the social, political, economic, and cultural norms that women and men have in various contexts. And so the second strand of ecofeminism is a little bit critical of the sort of Earth Mother version of ecofeminism. They say it essentializes it. It just boils women down to, well, you can care because you're a mother, rather than thinking about the broader context and trying to understand why women may, in fact, be better stewards. And so where I kind of situate my project, I think about feminist political ecology as a kind of guiding scope for my research that says women and men do access, experience, and use the natural environment differently. But this is a result of social norms. It's not a result of something necessarily natural or inherent, but we need to take that differentiation seriously in policy circles, as well as in our academic studies. So that's kind of one way that I'm thinking about this project. And then another thing that came up is that when I started to think about all of these programs, I said, well, what literature is written about them? And I realized there's not actually anything written about all-female teams or the role of women in conservation to a great extent. So what I did instead is look to the next best thing. And there is a lot of literature around all-female units and what we call gender mainstreaming in the peacekeeping and security sector side of things. So there are all-female peacekeeping deployments, there are all-female police units, and there are also women-only police stations in many countries, especially around in the global south. So there's many of these in India and Brazil. There are some in Nepal. And so what I did next, not having any literature about all-female guiding teams or all-female rangers, I said, well, what is this literature telling us about these other kinds of all-female or gender mainstreaming programs, and how can that maybe inform the research? So there's basically two different philosophies for how to bring women into previously male-dominated fields, whether it's peacekeeping in this case or potentially in conservation. And the first is the idea of gender mainstreaming, where you bring women into previously all-male units where the default category is male, right? So a police officer, you think of them as male. So to gender mainstream, you bring women into previously all-male units. This can potentially increase participation. Another model is the all-female team. So rather than trying to gender mainstream, you create all-female units. And the argument is that they actually produce more participation because gender mainstreaming hasn't necessarily worked as well as was hoped. So even within the UN system, which has done a lot of work in this space, there's debate as to what's the, quote, better way to do this, right? Should you gender mainstream or should you have all-female teams? Also, bringing women into these all-female teams are usually justified in two different ways. One is a rights-based approach, the idea that women should be able to participate in these kinds of activities, be it peacekeeping, policing, conservation. Another is an instrumentalist approach, which says, well, women should be brought in because they're actually better at doing X, Y, or Z. And in fact, the jury is still out on whether that's the case. But one thing that this literature really does tell us is that all female teams work differently than mixed gender teams. They have different benefits and different disadvantages, but they don't operate the same way. One thing that Leslie Pruitt, who wrote Woman in Blue Helmets, noted is that, especially in gender mainstreaming, it can produce conflict with the male colleagues in the teams. She notes these challenges often arise when women are isolated as tokens in a hyper-masculine space. So this is something that we need to think about and keep in mind when we're thinking about this, particularly in a very masculine space in rangers and guiding and so on and so forth. One thing we do see from the research is that men and women join these units for the same reason, for economic opportunity. And one thing that comes out in this research that I think will be very relevant for my research is that there is a class dynamic to trying to mainstream and bring women into these kinds of programs, the all-female peacekeeping, the all-female policing, or into guiding, because it allows working class women access to government employment or access to stable employment that often is usually only available to higher status or more educated women. But on the flip side, the literature does show that women in these units have what we call a second shift. They have to do extra work that is often tied to the idea of having community responsibilities or familial, quasi-familial responsibilities for the community around the deployments, which their male counterparts don't have. And so we have to take that into account when thinking about the economic impacts of these. In terms of performance, the literature around all-female units notes that the expectations for them are very high, incredibly high, and in fact they are held to a higher standard than men and their male peers. Almost across the board, looking at all the different studies that have been done so far, which tells us a lot about the hurdles that women will have to overcome often in this space. One thing that we do see in the literature is what's called a role model effect. When the Indian team of all-female peacekeepers was deployed to Liberia, to the UN mission in Liberia, there was then a steady increase of Liberian women joining or applying to join the National Police Force, showing that there was a clear correlation, if not causation, between seeing women in these roles and then more women seeking out those roles. However, the flip side of this is participation overall for this kind of unit in UN peacekeeping is still very low. It's about low single digits percentage, 8-9% of all of the peacekeepers deployed in the world are women. So you get some role model effect, but you're not actually getting increased participation to 50-50 parity. And the literature points out some reasons why this might be, because women have other kinds of family barriers that isn't taken into account in the way the programs are set up, or the recruiting is just not aimed specifically at women or assuring women that they have a space in these kinds of groups that code is very male. And so before I kind of transition to wrapping up and situating this to what my project will look at, I just want to end with a quote from Leslie Pruitt, who did the sort of hallmark study on all-female peacekeeping women in blue helmets. She says, it is important to remember that perceptions do not occur in a power vacuum devoid of gender norms and are necessarily affected by the way gender is constituted both locally and globally. So now that we've had that gender studies seminar, what does this have to do with conservation? Well, what I will be trying to do is looking at and being informed by all this literature that is out there on other kinds of all-female teams and other aspects of gender mainstreaming. How does that play out and impact conservation and in wildlife tourism spaces, which historically have tended to code as more male, but as we saw earlier, there's a real push to try to bring women into them. So a lot of the questions that I'll be looking at, I don't have the answers yet, maybe get back to me in a year after I've done all of my field work, but some of the questions that I'm really interested in nailing down are, what are the structural barriers to these kinds of teams, to recruiting these teams, but also to having them be effective and sustainable? What does the supply and demand structure look like for bringing women in? Are there enough women who are interested in training in these positions? Are there enough companies, NGOs, and government spaces that want to hire women either in a gender mainstreaming model, trying to get 50-50 parity, or in the all-female model? What are the downstream impacts on families and communities, potentially both positive and negative? A lot of the discourse is saying, well, it will only ever be positive, but we do need to take into account how there could be potential unexpected consequences to, for example, children who don't have access to their primary caregiver, for example. We also want to think about effectiveness of these programs and by what metrics. Are they effective in doing conservation better in a kind of instrumentalist approach? Or are they effective because they're bringing women into these spaces, which is much more of a rights-based evaluation? Are they better because of some natural ability, or are they better because of the different social norms that a mixed gender versus an all-female team? And then lastly, what are some best practices? As I said, these kinds of programs are being rolled out all over the continent, and in fact, there's some discussion in areas of Latin America of trying to roll them out as well. But we don't quite know exactly how they work from a kind of academic perspective. So can more scholars look and see what sort of best practices can be shared across industries and NGO and government spaces? So a lot more questions than answers, but I'd be really happy to talk to anyone who thinks they have some real insights here. I'm happy to learn from all of you as well.
I wanted to respond to Peggie's point, which was talking about collecting firewood and how can time be reduced in collecting firewood. Some of the people here may know of a product that's called a wonder bag, which is essentially a big padded bag, and you see them from time to time being used in camps to keep plates warm, etc. But that wasn't actually where the project started. It started by a lady in KwaZulu-Natal, and she identified the problem of collecting firewood, and not only as a reason that women were having to spend time, I wouldn't say waste time, but spend a lot of time out of the house looking for firewood. But actually also touching on Peggie's point, that she was worried about the risk to women of being attacked and raped while they were going out and collecting firewood. So she invented a product called the Wonder Bag, and actually the idea of it isn't really to keep plates warm in a lodge. The idea of it is that you can heat a small fire to heat your your meal up to boiling point, and then it can sit in this bag all day, so that by the time you get back from work or get home from the field, then you've got a cooked meal. So it reduces very much the use of firewood from hours on end into a few minutes to bring it up to boiling point. And she then empowered women across KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa to fabricate the bags. And I think last time I checked, she's got over 500 women employed in making the bags, but they're being distributed far and wide. So aside from employing the ladies, the main point is that it helps ladies in rural areas to cook family meals and reduce the amount of firewood that's being used, which then also helps the environment because less trees are being cut down, etc. So it touches the lives of women in many different ways. I don't think we have anything like this in Botswana. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as a comment, really, as something that maybe is an opportunity for us here to consider.
I've just got a little question. I wanted to pick your brains about what you think is the biggest challenge for women who want to go into conservation.
Okay, the biggest challenge for women in conservation, I would say them, but there are always ways on how to overcome those challenges anyway. And then again, it depends on where you, in terms of the field, you know. Someone talked about the tour guides earlier. If you are going to be a tour guide, in most places you have to be in the bush, you have to be working far from your family, you have to be far from your kids. But like I'm saying, there are ways on how to overcome that. It's all, it depends on the planning of how you're going to go about with that. I've been, say for example, in the tourism industry for more than 10 years now. I have worked in different companies. I still get to go see my family, I still go see my kids. You know, with a schedule, of course, tourism, it has the low peak season, high peak season. You end up getting used to, you know, there's a time when you get to be at work, and then of course, getting the women in conservation point of view, like somebody mentioned earlier, it's different backgrounds in different fields. So we've had guides who had quit guiding, and then they went to work maybe, say, in places like Department of Tourism. Say for example, in WFCB, I've realized that most of the ladies now, some of them are into environmental sciences, they are into conservation issues. So yeah, the challenges are there. Sometimes it's all about working long hours that you have to get used to that. You have to wake up early in the morning. Sometimes you have to sleep late in the night.
If you look at Botswana especially, you find that the areas where conservation, where we want to conserve the environment in its natural state and keep it for the future, the people who are there are the ones who are suffering, are the ones who are not getting the benefits of development as we know it. They are the ones who don't get roads, they don't get electricity, they don't get running water, they don't get flushing toilets, because we have to promote conservation and make sure the environment stays the same. So issues of conservation for people who are out there where conservation is supposed to happen, like in the Okavango Delta, like in the CKGR, they are the ones who suffer, who have to move out of that environment to where there is development, if they want their kids to go to school, if they want to use a flushing toilet, if they want to have internet, they have to move from an area where conservation is priority. Otherwise, they suffer. This is where I'm saying, as scholars, as conservationists, what are we doing for the indigenous people who are in these areas that we really need to protect? Because you go to Gaborone, you go to Francistown, go to Lubatse, you go to Mahalape, all along that railway line. Conservation is not a priority as it is for us where we are in the Delta or in the CKGR. Conservation there is something that we prioritize. And it comes at a cost to the local person. So that is the biggest challenge, that you forego development for you to conserve the natural environment. And for whom? Thank you.
Yep, 100%. There's a huge mismatch between who should be using less resources and so on. I mean, it's the same across the world. The people that are next to the natural resources are the ones expected to conserve them, while the people far from them are the ones that are actually causing all the damage. Vivian, you are a pioneer in the guiding world. How did your peers accept you? Did they welcome you? Were there any problems?
A good question, thank you. Being the pioneer in the guiding industry these days, the peers are okay with that, except sometimes our male counterparts, they still, it's hard for them to believe that women can do it. I know, especially where I come from in the Togo area, we always meet them in the park and they always say, but you ladies, we want to come and work with you. But the main reason of the Women Empowerment Initiative to have an all-women guiding team was to prove to the world that even a woman can have, the woman has the potential. Because before, we even had tourists who would undermine, when you tell somebody, okay, this is Vivian, she's going to be your guide. And then they'll be like, oh, really? Are you going to be able to drive in the deep sand? Are you going to be able to change the flat tire? So until you're out there with them and they see you really doing it, then that's when they started believing in the women's potential. And as for the male counterparts, most of the companies still, they have the main guys, because it was supposed to be the men's dominated job. But since we've now having women coming on board, to date I would say maybe since 2005 of the Women Empowerment Initiative on the guiding industry, we have more than 70 guides that have been trained so far. And every day we have applications, we have internships, and I've seen also that since the social media platforms across the country, that it's now that most of the women are now aware of other women having this passion in the conservation industry. It first started way back in, I think the first time I was featured, or we were featured as an all-women guiding team was in 2016 when Botswana television, the national television, came up to our company, and then they televised the whole thing. That's when everybody was surprised to say, oh, so these ladies can drive electric cars, these ladies can drive the electric boats. So that's when the whole world got to know about us. And that is why this enthusiastic women that teamed up to form the Women for Conservation Botswana are trying so hard to be heard or to be known across the country, that as women, let's take our flag high. Let our presence be known, in terms of conservation. There's quite a lot that is still to be done. I've realized that in 2021 when I was at the workshop, just to see whom I was surrounded by, because getting to know those ladies. For example, some of them, Miss Tauni is here. She's I call her Dr. Bay because she's doing her PhD. So that's something that has motivated me quite a lot, and the other young women as well, because it's all about sensitizing the young generation that even if you haven't made it big in school, you still have a chance of studying. Like, since I got into the guiding industry, I know I used to fight a lot with my employer because I wanted to continue with my guiding. But I was at some point a head guide, and then of course I missed going around with tourists and getting those tips. And then today I'm the environmentalist, so I'm learning every day. Even in terms of schooling, these ladies have taught me that you're never too old to learn. So I know someday, maybe 2-3 years to come, I'll come here and I'll be having my graduation hat on top of my head. Thank you.
Unfortunately, it is the case often in Botswana that you have to prove by doing. And it's something I think any woman in conservation has had that, where as soon as they see you driving around, they say, "But what? How can you do this?" And one moment I enjoyed particularly was when I first came out here. I drove up to almost to Chiefs Island in a petrol Hilux, and I was crossing channels, and I met a guide there, and he was so surprised and shocked that I was there in my Hilux. And then I went and carried on, and I came back, I found him later, and he was stuck with his guests, and I pulled him out with my petrol Hilux. And then he didn't have anything else to say. So I think it's really important to have women who stand up for themselves and just do by showing and inspire others. Okay, so this question relates to education and the disparity between men and women, and how businesses could be involved in bridging that gap and empowering women.
I can speak from the kind of literature perspective. There's a lot of literature out there that indicates that part of the reason why the groups and programs that code as all male continue to code as all male and continue to be male dominated is because from both a role model perspective, there's not the enough people there that young girls can see themselves in those roles. One interesting thing that comes out in the research of all-female peacekeeping is that the women that apply to be on those programs come from families of other peacekeepers or police officers. So there's a real role modeling effect that plays into it. And the other secondary or connected concept here is that what women and young girls are socialized into in their education, in their primary, secondary, and potentially even tertiary education. What is seen as acceptable also from parents and families for women to pursue either at a secondary or tertiary level. So how businesses can respond to that, as an academic, I would say look to the best practices from the scholars that are working on this to try to find ways that there are actionable things that businesses can do to encourage a role modeling effect or to disrupt the way in which young girls imagine themselves in or out of a role. And so that might be sensitizing girls at secondary level that they can go on into these paths, creating training programs, creating pathways. There's all kinds of, I think, creative solutions to that, but it's interesting in the academic research that has been done, the role modeling effect and also the sort of social and cultural norms around what is considered an acceptable or unacceptable career path are really strong indicators as in whether a kind of career field remains really gender segregated or not. So I'm happy.
It's a very important question, especially that we are in the hub of tourism, where families are separated. We get children left behind in Maun or in the villages, and their parents going into camps for extended periods of time. And the children will be alone at home, and some of them don't attend school properly, or they don't have proper support, because for you to make it in school is the teacher, is the parent and the child. So if it's the teacher and the child and no parent, then this cycle of no education cannot be broken. So as companies, as businesses, we need to look at closing that gap. How do we ensure that the children of our staff continue receiving a good education and participating in the school education as they should? How do we make sure that they continue doing homework? They are not abused, they are fed, because when they go to school on an empty stomach, they are fed, they are taken care of, and they are not abused, because some of them are abused by whoever is left to look after them when the parents are in camp. So for me, the reality is the businesses have to invest in the children of their employees. So when the employees are at camp, let's make sure that we break the cycle of lack of education or minimal education by ensuring that the children of our employees continue with their education and continue such that when the results or the school living results come out, we can be proud as a tourism industry that our children are doing well at school, despite not having their parents at home. We have created a system, a support system that will look after the children so that we stop this illiteracy culture that is very dominant in the tourism areas. If you look at the literacy level of Ngamiland, it's as low as that of Chobe and Haiti. And the denominator there is tourism.
What would you say to men out there to ask or to advise them how they could be allies?
Their advice to men out there is simply to say there is no success without hard work. So we are where we are because of our hard work. And for them as our support system, they have to also believe in our potential. Like somebody mentioned earlier that, naturally women are good caretakers. Women are very sensitive to even small issues, small things. So sometimes, maybe to give an example of what I do, I always put what I do in the forefront. For example, if I have to wake up and go to work, I know that I'm going to work. And then I even forget that it's a Friday or it's a weekend sometimes. But you realize that as for our male friends, once it becomes Friday, then they'll be thinking of, okay, maybe we can go get 2 beers, of which there's always some time to do that, you know. I would rather wake up in the morning, take my guests with a fresh mind, not babalize them, things like that. So that is why as women sometimes we succeed, because we think and put all our effort in what we do. I'm saying this from experience because if we take a place like Chobe, there is a lot of entertainment there. We have clubs, we have bars, we have everything. And it's always good to set ourselves a policy or a standard. Like, say, for example, somebody would say, okay, ladies at WFCB, they take their work seriously, or their motive seriously. Or ladies at Chobe Game Lodge, they take their work seriously. It's all because of that. Once you set to do something, then you put your mind and all your effort into it. But like I'm saying, it's all about the standard and the policy. Sometimes we do things for the wrong reasons. Like, first of all, if we talk of education, we need to get everybody on board. Like, the whole country should know, okay, where does our GDP comes from? It comes from the diamonds. So when are the days when we have to think of the mining industry? With tourism, we know for sure if we go into conserve and preserve what we have, this is going to be here for a long time. For the young generation, so many years to come, they will still find this in place as long as we conserving our natural environment. And the thing is, okay, fine, if we're having all the tourists coming, we should treat them with the utmost respect. We should give them what they've paid for, not just to run around and go show them a lion or show them a leopard. So what if there won't be a leopard in a sighting, or there won't be a lion in a sighting? There's so many other things to talk about. Peggie mentioned earlier about the trees. You know, we have so many indigenous trees out there that we can learn about, so that when you go out there maybe in a national park and there isn't much to say to your guests, there is how you can entertain them. Talk about the trees, talk about all the animal footprints that are on the ground. So that's what we mean by the standard. It's not all about running and then looking at the time to say, oh, okay, I have to be back by 1 o'clock. And then it's all about speeding. At the end of the day, you didn't give them any content. Thank you.
And whenever I speak to non-gender studies audiences about gender studies, I try to make the argument that rethinking our gender norms and rethinking what a woman can or cannot do in a world, in a society, isn't necessarily a threat to men. In fact, it's emancipatory for men and women at the same time, right? If you open up the possibilities for a woman to be in guiding, you maybe also open up the possibilities for a man to be a nurse, which it tends to be a career path that codes as more female, right? Or a man to be a teacher or a caregiver. And I think that is something that frees up individuals to be individuals, and it can be liberatory and emancipatory for men and women. And so when I talk about gender, I'm not talking only about women, even though obviously I'm looking at all female teams. I think that it can be something that frees up people to pursue whatever is most fulfilling and interesting for them, and it allows us to kind of break down those preconceived notions about what any individual can do in the world. And so that, in terms of translating that into allyship, I would just say gender and focus on things like gender mainstreaming don't have to be conceived of or thought of as threatening. A lot of times in the literature, and I think in everyday life, it's seen as a status threat to men if there are more women in X field. And I don't actually think that that's the case. I think the pie is big enough that we can all share it.
Men as allies, we really have to work together as human beings. And to be an ally, the important thing is to be able to call out injustice when you see it. Call it out. Don't ignore it, don't praise it. When you see there is injustice, the men should be able to stand up and say, this is wrong. Don't say, yeah, that's it, show him, show her that you are a guy. No, call it out, name it, and say this kind of behavior is not right. And you have to stand up as a mentor, as an ally, show others how it's done. And you have to praise those who practice equality, who practice humanity, because it's all about being human to the other person. Be the support system. Let's not drag others down because they are women or because they are different gender from what we are. We need to be supportive of each other and just be human. It says, allyship says, let's promote each other's rights and respect each other, respect each other's rights. And power, it's infinite, You cannot finish it. We all can have a share. So let's share our power and not do power over others. And let's just call it out. Don't be embarrassed to tell someone this is not right. Let's stand up for each other's rights. Thank you.
Yep, I fully support that. There's no need to question anyone's ability based on their gender, their race, anything like that. Just believe in each other, and all will be well. We had just the question was how can stakeholders? We've sort of covered this a little bit, but how could stakeholders encourage women into conservation more?
So we talk about in the social sciences a norm entrepreneur, someone that's pushing the boundaries on changing a norm, and that I think is where both business and civil society and education and everyday life can move the needle in that regard. Like being a norm entrepreneur in whatever place, you have a little bit of power to push the needle. So if you're on a board of an NGO or you have a position in a company, like being that norm entrepreneur to push ahead on whether it's gender mainstreaming or localization or whatever it is that you think needs to be addressed. So I think that can play a role in it.
I would like to, first of all, thank the Kalahari Research Conservation. They are the ones that started the initiative of the Women for Conservation Botswana, for it to get started. And of course, the Women Empower Initiative that was done by the Okavango to employ an all-women guiding team that started off with 1 or 2 ladies, and today is a team of 20 women. I would like to call upon the involvement of other stakeholders as well to come together in terms of internships, education, mentorship, and networking, because there is quite a lot that needs to be done. For example, if you look at maybe the advertisements that are done on the daily basis, we have quite a lot of women that are interested in either getting to learn on conservation issues or conservation background, but sometimes they can't because they lack sponsorship and stuff. So that will be very helpful, and we will go a long way in educating our young generation to come in terms of the women in conservation. Like we looking forward to see more women leadership in terms of conservation as well. You know, we used to know that it's only men that are at the forefront because we thought women can't do it, but so far we have the proof, we have seen it with our eyes that women can also do it, just like other people have been giving examples. Now in Botswana we have ladies in the army, of which is something that we did not have before. We now have women in the police department. We have men who are nurses. In almost all the departments, now we have women that are also taking the lead.
And finally, strong partnerships with communities. Those are very important. We have to work closely with our communities so that we can understand their needs and respond to their needs, not what we think or what the stakeholders think the communities need. It's important to address the needs of the community so that they can improve their livelihoods, improve their social status, and that can only be done through partnerships, meaningful partnerships with the communities that we work in.
You were talking about support for the employees and looking after the children and so on. Do you have a scenario in mind? What would that look like ideally? What could companies do?
I like that question because we at Women Against, I said I won't talk about Women Against Rape. Okay. We have had a number of cases coming from children who were left with their neighbor or with their friend, who got pregnant, who dropped out of school, who were abused, who didn't go to school, and it's quite painful and sad to see that this child's future is going to be destroyed or has been destroyed. So, my suggestion, just as we can build structures where when you fly in you think, how did all this material come here? Surely we can have small hostels, nothing luxurious, and we have retired people like Rhonda who can supervise these hostels and make sure that the students or the children, our children, get the support and the safety and security that they need. We can also, as organizations, within the community, let's involve the community. What can the community offer? Helen knows that we went to Shorobe when we wanted to create shelters. The government was looking for shelters, and we said, but there should be another way that we can involve the communities. And the communities identified houses, places, households where they could become safe spaces for the women and children who were running away from violent places. So similarly, the tourism industry engaged the community. We have a space where we can use to house our children when their parents are in camp, so that they are safe, they can get food, they can get their education, they will be safe, they can do that. So it's something that I'm not saying the tourism industry should do alone, but we should do it with the community. Our guidance. The tourism industry has so much that they can offer in terms of knowledge, capacity, mentors, people volunteering, coming in. Now we run MORS, Maun Animal Welfare Society. We have volunteers coming to do that veterinary medicine stuff. We can have volunteers coming in to look after the children in these homes when the parents are out. When the parents come in, this volunteer who has come in, they go out and enjoy 2 days in our beautiful camp. So it's partnerships with the community that can protect our children, because they are the future. let's do it together. Let's partner with them.
Okay, thank you. I've had a request from a visitor who would like to come up and just provide a comment. Her name is Nani.
I'm an African. I'm born in Kitwe, the old town of Rhodesia. I was born there. I was raised in a rural town. And then I was educated in South Africa. I immigrated to Australia, and today I am an extremely successful woman. What I would like to say to all the females here is, I'm not a feminist. I love my darling husband and I look up to him. But never, ever, ever do we have to stand back to males. We are what we were born to be. And we are strong in our own rights. We can do whatever we want to do, and we can achieve whatever we want to be. I was raised not to look at male and female, and what I can do as a female and what I can do as a male. I was raised to be whatever I can be. That's what my parents taught me to do. And that's what I would like to say to all these women. We can be whatever we want to be. We can be the best in conservation that we want to be. I love it. I've got a soft heart. We come from Australia every year for 12 years now, visiting Botswana, visiting South Africa, the Kruger Park, everywhere. I love that. And that is true to my own. But ladies, you can be whatever you want to be. Never, ever, ever stand back. You have got it in you to do whatever you want to do.
So the question is, how can women working for organisations promote corporate social responsibility in the context of conservation?
Thank you. I'll just outline some of the projects that we do as women in conservation. It's mainly to be involved with the community, also to do some outreach, especially to schools, and then we get involved into celebrated days, especially nationally, like maybe the national cleanup campaigns and stuff. So there's quite a lot. I know from our side as well, going to schools, mainly to go spend some time with the kids, you know, take them out on game drives, on boat cruises, talk to them about our natural environment, just to spend a day with them, and then we take them back to school or back to their respective places. Those are some of the social corporate responsibilities that we do, especially with the kids. And then as for the youngsters, say maybe those ones who are finishing at their tertiary schools, we realized that sometimes, because Vivian is a tour guide, I would be a role model to the other youngsters that they want to be a tour guide, but not knowing the requirements of a tour guide. For example, there are these training institutes that would train the kids to do the professional tour guide license, but at the end of the day, they start off with that license, but then they can't actually go do the job because they don't have a driver's license. So sometimes, you know, we need to teach them to say, okay, if you want to be a tour guide, get yourself a driver's license, because after all, for you to drive that car or for you to have a PRDP, your driver's license has to have at least 1 year. You know, sometimes we do things, especially because of money, because when somebody wants to go get a guide license, they'll just go straight to school. Of course, they'll get a certificate. Then what happens is when somebody comes and they want to do an internship, you realize that they don't have a driver's license. So every now and then we visit these institutions, and then we talk to them. I know we've helped quite a few that they have already started to do the training so that they can get a license. But then it helped because once we realized that they did not have the license, then they were doing the two at a time. Even that would mean a setback because then they would have to wait for their driver's license to be 1 year old before they can actually start doing the job. So there's quite a few and a lot of the social initiatives that are out there that we share, and so many projects that are in place, of course, with the support system of either the stakeholders or just individuals. Sometimes it's not all about the funds, it's all about mentorship and networking. Then you share a lot of information that we did not know about. So also thanks to Annette, because now we know there is a Fulbright Scholarship. Obviously it's going to benefit some of us, or if not most of us. And having this kind of meetings, that is why I feel honored and privileged to have been a part of this gathering, because from here I'll be going back to where I have worked and lived for 10 years. I'll go back to my home village and share all this information that I have learned about today. So thank you very much.
One thing to keep in mind, sort of to maybe problematize the question a bit, is that women tend to get what are called second shift responsibilities within organizations and institutions, whether it's an academic department, whether it's a guiding team, whether it's a company, and so just be mindful of how much extra and especially unpaid labor you're asking your female employees to do as compared to your male employees. So it doesn't always have to be the female employees that's doing the community outreach, right? You see that a lot, the second shift, a woman employee being expected to do more because she slots into this like caring, nurturing role, and a lot of times that is an unpaid labor or an unrecognized labor within institutions that doesn't get the due that it should. And so just be mindful of those kinds of disparate responsibilities you might be giving to different employees, and recognize or shout out or celebrate when someone is sort of doing that unpaid labor so that they get recognition for it and evaluation for it in their annual or whatever it might be, their evaluation. So.
Women, we don't network as well as men do. That's why we are usually poor and drifting into lecturing jobs and all that. So women in corporate positions or in corporate organizations, they have to start to learn to network and mentor and pass on what they have onto others. That is corporate social responsibility. It has to start with us as individuals before it goes to the company. What are we doing ourselves to make sure we are in a network that can grow and multiply what we can give? Thank you.
Like I said, I feel honored and privileged to have been a part of this gathering. What I would like to say is that we are here as women in conservation. We more open to all the mentorship, advices, and everything. So, as Women for Conservation Botswana, we have the Facebook page that already we're having so many indigenous women across Botswana that are joining the group, but we promise that we'll put more effort into that and also share a bit of knowledge and what we hoping for the future in terms of the group. And then
would you take one message from Women Against Rape is that as we do conservation, let's make sure or ensure that women are also part of conservation, not just participants or passive participants, but they should reap the benefits as well. Let us uplift the women and the children who are in our conservation areas. They are half the population, so let us see them on the tables, half of them at the table. Thank you very much for inviting me.